I hope I'm not going to be too much like, you might remember Gabriel Conroy in Joyce's story The Dead, who fears that his after-dinner speech is a little too high-minded. I think I should have come with more jokes, but I'm saying something serious, I hope, so I hope the high-mindedness will be allowed, eager as you are I know, to get out of this room, I'm sure, and go to the exhibition. For novelists and short story writers, this is an age of extremes. On the one hand, there's an enormous production and consumption of fiction, from the Pulitzer Prize winner to a popular hybrid that might be renamed 50 Shades of Hunger Games. Fiction, from the most popular to the more rarefied, still retains a fair amount of its old prestige. On the other hand, I think we're living in an age that exhibits quite a lot of hostility to fiction writing and storytelling, even when, or especially when, it thinks it's praising fiction. This hostility, I think, comes in two large forms: utilitarianism and distraction. Both in different but overlapping ways menace the writing and reading of serious literature and seek to replace or minimize it. By utilitarianism, I really mean a many-headed monster that's part pragmatism, part neuroscience, part evolutionary biology, part social science. A monster that roars for its ransom while spewing data. Utilitarianism, as you know, constantly asks us to justify what we do in the name of usefulness, benefit, function. You read fiction, then justify it by proving that it makes you more empathetic. In 2013, some of you remember, the New York Times reported that recent research had shown that reading even a small amount of Chekhov is good for one's empathy. What was new about this study was that exposure to literary fiction, like Alice Munro or Chekhov, seemed to make people more empathetic than if they were exposed to popular fiction or even to nonfiction. Hey. Also striking by all accounts was the relatively short exposure required. Participants read for only 3 to 5 minutes before being asked to undergo various empathy tests, e.g. looking at photographs of people's eyes and working out their emotional states from the visual evidence. What's not to like? The better the fiction, the better the sympathy. It would be hard to find a neater emblem of capitalist America. 3 minutes of Chekhov, taken every day like a pill, will strengthen your empathy muscles. Science proves it. You believe in God, then science will either tell you that prayer has been proven to have healing powers, or evolutionary psychology will tell you that you're hardwired to believe in an illusory God. You teach literature or writing or philosophy, say, then don't be surprised if the government starts ranking universities and university departments by how much their graduates are earning by the age of 25. A newish movement, sometimes called the quantified self, offers to incorporate technology and wearable sensors so that all aspects of a person's daily life can be measured and processed: food intake, mood arousal, mental performance, blood oxygen, and so on. Future technology will perhaps allow for the proper measuring of our daily dose of 3 minutes of Chekhov reading. The popular application of such utilitarianism can be seen almost any week, alas, in a typical David Brooks column in the New York Times, wherein almost all choices and decisions to write poetry, to live in the suburbs, to marry at 29 rather than 19, to go and hear Bruce Springsteen live, are passed through a pragmatic prism. What does it do for me? And what does it do for the fabric and functioning of society? Do MRI machines show that certain parts of my brain loyally light up when I'm engaged like a good citizen in such activities? We live in an age when a well-known Harvard professor of psychology, a popular expert on happiness, can essentially shill on TV for Prudential mutual funds, and no one is very surprised or shocked about it. Let's make happiness work for us. At the same time, rapid advances in technology are making it harder and harder to summon the kind of concentrated attention on works of consummate literary achievement that are needed in order to do them justice. We're living in an age that Sherry Turkle has characterized as one of distributed presence. Fewer of us have the time or inclination needed to devote ourselves to a serious reading of any text. We consume in fragments, Instagramming, Snapchatting, scrolling, and apping our way through an overwhelmingly visual world. As nobody really writes letters any longer, so soon emails may be too wordy and bulky, doubtless to be supplanted by texting or perhaps just liking and unliking. The window has been replaced by the screen, and our world is dominated by these canny icons, from the smallest, which are rarely out of our hands, certainly out of mine, to the largest, the flawlessly born pixels and riverine flow of light in Times Square or Piccadilly Circus, the fluorescent gods and goddesses staring down in luminous surveillance from every cityscape. An abolition of privacy, surveillance, combines with a drastic intensification of privacy, everyone coddling his little relationship with his little device. Or to put it a bit differently, it's the abolition of privacy and the simultaneous privatization of privacy. Of course, just as there is serious and life-saving neuroscience, just as one day the balance of my life might well lie in the proper functioning of an MRI, so digital technology has liberated millions of lives. I'm not only grateful for the fruits of scientific advancement, I'm mindful of the fact that a great deal of technology is fundamentally morally neutral, and that to decry it is like complaining about electricity. Still, utilitarianism, I think, and digital distraction converge to enforce an overweening rhetoric of success. Both are natural allies of the language of business. The aim is always successful living, a successful life. The measure is success and the tools are empirical. We're always looking for what can be found, quantified, tabulated, proven, explained. Pragmatic utilitarianism provides the frame within which technology goes about its brilliant business, always promising to make our lives more efficient, quicker, more liberated, more informed, more healthy, and, if the Apple ads are to be believed, more individual, more beautiful, even more musical. Remember that ad about the song? What can we do as writers and readers of literature in a new age of triumphant utilitarianism and technological vainglory? What are the prospects for people like us? How do we ensure that literature stays vital and important? Perhaps we should consider this historical moment as offering, paradoxically, a great opportunity for literature as a site of concentration, critique, surplus, stillness at the eye of the storm. Here are a few ways in which literature might go about asserting itself, justifying itself, to borrow the language of utilitarianism. First, critique and resistance. It won't be lost on any keen reader of Dostoevsky that our age is in danger of repeating some of the crude utilitarianism of the 1850s, 1860s, and 1870s. We need to borrow, I think, some of the moral passion that drove Ruskin, Dickens, Arnold, Whitman, George Eliot, Tolstoy to take up arms against the ruthless industrial complexes of their age. In his novella, Notes from Underground, written in 1864, Dostoevsky fiercely engaged with Russian and British progressivism and meliorism. Is it true, he asked, that everything is getting better and better? To have explained everything about where we came from and how we function is not, said Dostoevsky, to know where we are going. And our massive technologies of knowledge cannot explain a great deal about the thwarted and self-thwarting mysteries of human motivation. For instance, says Dostoevsky's underground man, we don't always do what is in our best interests because we don't always want to. Sometimes we want to harm our own self-interest, to sabotage ourselves, to live with a scandalous lack of pragmatic success. Maybe nowadays we seem to lack titanic figures like Tolstoy and George Eliot. Yet contemporary literature in recent years has powerfully mobilized itself against some of the political and technological presumptions of the age. Some of those writers are in this room. Others are people like Marilyn Robinson, David Foster Wallace, Don DeLillo, Jose Saramago, Teju Cole, Carl Ove Knausgaard, Michel Houellebecq. These writers don't agree with each other. Variously, they mount their critiques from religious or leftist or conservative positions. But they are fierce resistors, nonetheless. We feel their writing to have a force of moral outrage. They appreciate and explore our age, but when necessary, they unlike it. Second, concentration. By this I mean that one antidote, obviously, to distraction is an insistence on concentration, and that art insists thus by virtue of having form. This might sound like a trivial or automatic attribute. Of course, books have form, but I think it's crucial. Life is essentially formless, and technology, though full of cute, discrete objects, is essentially formless too. It's protean, it has to be. It's about the process of becoming. It's proud of its built-in obsolescence. 5S is always becoming 6, 6 plus, 6S, 7, and so on. Technology dreams of infinity. It should do. More and more and more. Where do you want to go is its right and perpetual mantra. The question mark dangling enticingly. And notice that when video games are extolled for their fiction-making qualities, the emphasis is always on the multiplicity of options and choices. The game player, we told, can choose many possibilities from tempting menus. But literary form, while of course expansive and multiple, also has a certain negative power. It shows us where things stop. It places an almost sacred border around the artwork and says, this is not identical with the claims of the world. This is a space that demands a certain degree of strangeness, difference, supplication. Really, universally, human relations stop nowhere, said Henry James, of fictional form. And, he went on, the eternal problem of the artist is to draw a circle within which such relations merely appear to stop. That circle is form. And as Henry James understood, the stopping of an endless prolongation may be form's most important virtue. The place where everything seems to stop and seems to have its own perfect justification. And maybe that feeling is strongest in short stories and in poems, which have such concentrated emblems of form. One thing such form powerfully allows us to do is to measure the length and shape of our lives. Life is relatively formless, but written lives are more shapely. Without being too pious about it, I'd say there's something religious or perhaps liturgical about this life measuring. The Lord shall preserve thy going out and thy coming in, says the psalmist in Psalm 121. Fiction in particular gives us formal insight into the shape of someone's life. We can see the beginning and end of many fictional lives, their developments and errors, stasis and drift, and of course not just fiction, non-fiction too. How about that wonderful poem that Dwayne Betts just read, his second poem that we just heard. It does this in different ways, by sheer scope and size, the long peopled novel, full of many different lives, many beginnings and endings, but also by compression and concentration. The novella that radically compacts a single life from start to finish, as in The Death of Ivan Illich, or Stoner, or Dennis Johnson's Train Dreams, or Alice Munro's The Bear Came Over the Mountain. And partly by turning the present into past. Although we move forward through a story, the story is already complete. We hold it in our hands. Every time we return to a novella or a novel or a story we've already read, we affirm the strangely expansive but also negative power of fictional form, its ability to hold and animate and stop a life for our scrutiny. Third, unnecessary surplus. Against technological pragmatism with its insistence on what could be precisely measured, explained, justified, and of course, I'm not decrying the existence or the importance of such measurement. We rely on it every single day when we cross a bridge or drive a car or go up in a plane. But against that tendency, art insists, I think, on the gratuitous, the inexplicable, the cloudy, the mysterious. I don't mean by this that storytelling doesn't clarify. Of course it does. I'm not arguing for mystification or superstition, so much as for a kind of margin of beauty, a hinterland of surplus, always more than is necessary or merely useful or merely functional. For many fiction writers, detail plays the role of the gratuitous, the extra, the thing in itself that is irreducible and intrinsic because it can't quite be accounted for or pragmatically justified. There's a moment early on in Madame Bovary where Flaubert describes how when the window of Madame Bovary's house was open, villagers could hear her playing the piano. And Flaubert pauses to linger on one of those villagers. Quote, "The bailiff's clerk often stopped to listen as he passed on the road, bareheaded, shuffling along in slippers, holding in his hand the notice he was about to post." When I teach this book, I like to ask my students to explain why Flaubert stops to notice the bailiff's clerk. Why is he there? None of us, me included, can quite answer the question. None of us can account for the little surplus of detail, the spilling over, not just a clerk, but one who is bareheaded and shuffling along in slippers. Why bareheaded? Why in slippers? You could say that something pragmatically instructive can be learned from Emma Bovary's life, for sure. But what is the use of a detail like this? Literature is made up of millions of irreducible details. They stick out of the frieze of form like hands begging us to touch them. Fourth and finally, fictionality. Utilitarianism and pragmatism make use of the real because the real, of course, is eminently usable. And on the other side, digital technology, because it's centered on the screen rather than on the page, tends to emphasize story making, perhaps, rather than storytelling, fantasy, video gaming, virtual reality experiments, and so on. Somewhere between the real and the purely hypothetical lies literary storytelling. That's to say, the narration of a story that is invented but not escapist, imagined but not fantastical, fabricated but not untruthful, made up but not a lie. What Thomas Mann once called the game of not quite. To the artist, wrote Thomas Mann, new experiences of truth are new incentives to the game, new possibilities of expression. He believes in them, he takes them seriously just so far as he needs in order to give them the fullest and profoundest expression. In all that, goes on Mann, the artist is very serious, serious even to tears, but yet not quite. That not quite seems important to me. It preserves the fictional in storytelling, reminds us that the artist offers something to us but also withdraws from us, finally refuses to give us everything, which is to say the artist refuses to make her story identical with the world. Close to the world, but not quite. Art is the nearest thing to life, said George Eliot. It's a mode of amplifying experience and extending our contact with our fellow men beyond the bounds of our personal lot. The nearest thing to life, but not the same thing as life. Our age has, in different ways, a terrible reality hunger, to adapt the title of an anti-fictional polemic by the writer David Shields. The artist of distinction, of course, feeds that reality hunger, but at the same time offers a kind of food on a special plate that will not quite feed that hunger either, that will not quite fit into the maw of the hungry, reality-reverencing, pragmatic, data-crunching monster. The artist sets down this slightly perplexing but very delicious food, and the reality monster looks at it and slinks away, provoked, bemused, and fittingly disappointed. Thank you.